I admire who just know their direction right out of the gates.
Sure.
I think my brother is definitely one of those individuals who from is as early on as I can remember, I'm gonna be a game programmer.
Okay.
Sure enough, he works for Nintendo as an engineer.
Wow. All right, hello and welcome to a very dressed up version of Friday Conversations. I'm Jonathan Byron. I'm here with Sean O'Regan. Sean, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, glad to be here.
Absolutely, so good to have you. So yeah, normally we dress down a little bit on these, but you've got a meeting after this, so you came a little bit dressed. I was like, that's a good excuse for you to put on a little bit of a jacket and matchy.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Which I think is a kind of a good segue into what we're talking about. And for those of you that are just tuning in, or I guess everybody's just tuning in, you and I are the ones that have been having the conversation. We're talking about this thing that is such a big and esoteric thing, but we're kind of in that like middle of our lives. You're 51, I'm 45, and something you used the word. It was so good. We're not immortal anymore. Up until like not too long ago, we had this like immortal. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I'm at this stage in my life where I realized that I'm not immortal.
Yeah.
Anymore, and that's I'm very active.
Right.
I play a lot of sports. I work out a lot, and one tweak in the back, or it's just this. All of a sudden, it's a reminder that wait, time out.
Yeah.
I am not going to live forever, right?
Right.
And so that just kind of spurs a lot of other thoughts in different areas of your life. As about what am I doing? Your kids, your career, and I still I have a lot longer to go.
Right.
But as we talked about, it happens in a blink of an eye.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's just this more of this conscious effort, or realization of what am I doing and where am I going, and my being intentional.
Right.
In what I do, being active and relationships.
Yeah. For sure.
So all those thoughts, culminate.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at, today.
Yeah. And so many, I guess, so many threads to pull on. And I'll use an example. A friend of mine, I recently saw, and this is so bizarre that this happened to me like just yesterday. I saw a post on social media from a friend, and in it was a picture of a friend that I've only recently made, right? So I've only known this guy maybe a year. Mm-hmm. And in this post, he was a car salesman. And it's just like, I was like, wait a second, I know that guy. And so like one of the things that I'm becoming more acutely aware of is our evolution as people. Mm-hmm. And so you and I ran into each other recently, and we had met in a previous life, right? Not that long ago, right. But it was like you were doing something different. The context that we now are getting to know each other in is different than that. So talk to me about that. Like as you've evolved, and then in light of this bigger, like, oh my, like I'm not going to last forever. Mm-hmm. How have you interacted with that?
Yeah, I think, for me personally, I think everyone's journey is different, but, my journey in particular, it's, I spent a lot of time, having fun in life, right? Mm. And so not really getting serious in any one direction, right? But trying to, figure out a direction, right? And a lot of people, I admire who just know their direction right out of the gates.
Sure.
I think my brother is definitely one of those individuals who from is as early on as I can remember, I'm gonna be a game programmer.
Okay.
Sure enough, he works for Nintendo as an engineer.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
I mean, knew from, and I'm like, that's impressive,
yes.
Right? And so there's always been this transition of I've always liked money and finance, and so it was just kind of this, well, let me find what vein or what avenue really fits, right?
Yeah.
And so there's been some of that, right? Going on. Let's try banking. Well, let's try. The private sector, let's get out and, maybe, a controller,
Sure.
That's how we first met. I was, with your father-in-law's business, I was a controller, and now back in banking,
Yeah.
And so, and you'll find it interesting that, in the finance world, there's a lot of movement.
Yes.
So in banking, people can work at, several banks, either whether it's, mergers or just, hopping around.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
I don't think we'll go down this road, but you saying that makes me think, like, just yesterday, I think it was, I was thinking about, financial advisors and just that whole world, not just like one specific, but like that whole world, and how I've met some guys that are like, you could tell, like, you don't know anything about money, but you were able to get this title and you're asking people to trust you with their money. Myself in real estate, when I started in real estate 10 years ago, I was like, I don't know the first thing about any of this stuff, but I have a license and I'm helping somebody make the biggest purchase of their life. One of the things, we're actually, today's Thursday, tomorrow, we're talking about imposter syndrome at our Friday conversation. There's an interesting balance of fake it till you make it, and then now you're talking about the whole finance world.
Well, it's a phenomenal tie-in.
Okay, go.
It really is. It's a phenomenal tie-in because that's kind of it, right? So you first start out, as you described, you start out in this industry that you know nothing about, but you got a license, and now you're licensed to talk about it, right?
Yes.
But you don't really know anything about it, right?
Right.
So through experience, meeting people and doing different deals, you gain that hands-on real life experience, right? So then, yes, you become adept to talking about it, right? You become knowledgeable, right? Do we ever become experts? That's something I've been wrestling around with. Are we ever truly experts, right? I say no, right?
Sure.
Because the world just keeps changing and evolving so quickly, right? That yes, I do know a lot about some things, right? I can give you a bank loan. I know some parameters. I know some constraints. I know how to, make things work. But am I truly an expert? I don't know. And that goes into the imposter syndrome. Some days I don't feel like I know anything. Right. And as I get older, I feel like I know even less.
Yeah.
So it's definitely interesting going back into that, immortality, concept. As I get older, the less I know.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking when you were talking about. And just thinking about expertise.
Yeah.
There is this, almost like a bell curve where at the beginning you know nothing. And although you're keenly aware of it, you're also keenly aware that you can't let on that you know nothing. And then you kind of hit this sweet spot where you really know more than most.
Yep.
Not quite as much as the experts. But then I think the expert is the one that's like back down here saying like, I don't know anything. Like you just kind of like start to realize, wow, it's like this humility that is coupled with actual knowledge.
For sure.
And that's what separates, an expert from a knowledgeable from a beginner. And it's interesting that the beginner and the expert are kind of on that same level of like this combination of humility and confidence.
Absolutely.
It's just a little bit reversed which one's coming from where. But that's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the humility part of it. It's acknowledging, right, that process as well, right? And so you can come out of the gates. Oh, I'm gonna kill it. I'm gonna be a millionaire. I'm gonna do all these things, and you get to that that crest, as you say, and you're like, okay, I feel like I'm in my zone, and then the more things that you see and learn and witness, you're like, I do know some things, but not as much as I thought I did. So again, it goes back to the I'm an imposter, right? Fake it till you make it, concept.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the ways that presents itself, or that I rub up against it, is when I'm talking to somebody in an adjacent field, or in a like talking to you about finance and banking and stuff like that. Like, we dovetail in a lot of ways, but you start talking about some products that I've not encountered before. And this is, with SSBE, this business group that I'm running, like I run into this all the time. Like this idea of guiding people on a path. And then I realized there's this whole aspect of business that I was completely unaware of, and a whole industry, not just industries plural, around this thing. Like you say controller. And like, to be honest, I'm out of my depth. I don't know what a controller is. I don't know what you did for that company. None of that. Like, it's like, this is a whole different level. And so I try to stick to what I know, and then also bring in what I don't know. but it's a compounding effect. And then, yeah, you get to this point where you're like, okay, I'm 45, 50 years into this thing called life, and I don't, your brother found a path, and he's content.
Yeah.
An aspect that I've leaned into quite a bit is we all need and we all have translators. So you take a deep dive, and I don't care. Pick something. Let's say religion, right? You take a deep dive and you get theology degrees. You there's a certain point that you come to where you and I no longer talk the same language.
Mm-hmm.
You know more about the Bible and the Quran and all these different worlds. You know more about it than I could possibly learn in a lifetime. In that that's what you've devoted yourself to, and I no longer have a lifetime ahead of me, right? Maybe I'm using wrong words there, but all this stuff,
yeah.
and in order for me to tap into it, we almost need a translator, right? Somebody not, and in this situation, I know absolutely nothing about religion, right? We need this translator that's like, okay, hey, noob, you know nothing,
mm-hmm.
right? And so I think that's where expertise starts to get really interesting, because you could be an expert in, and I'll say even within the scope of religion, you could be an expert in the Bible and be completely unaware of other religions and their holy texts
mm-hmm.
and all of this stuff. And then, the massive book of knowledge other than ChatGPT, how do you access that without an intermediary that can help you? Actually, talking about the Bible, there's a scene in the Bible, there's a passage where there's a guy reading, and another guy comes up alongside him, and he's like, oh, what are you reading? And he's like, I have no idea. How can I understand without someone to explain this to me? And of course, he explains it to him, and there's a way more to that story.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an aspect of that in every area of life. Like you talking about fitness and getting in shape, talking about legacy planning. There's people that devote their lives to helping people write wills and
mm-hmm.
prepare for what happens when they leave this earth. I was just thinking about it this morning. I drove by an estate sale, right? And it's when you lose someone, or you're putting mom or dad into a nursing home, or these different transitions, I'm 45. I shouldn't be thinking about this, but as we talked about, I recently lost my dad. My mom is now single,
mm-hmm.
widow, and when she passes, because inevitably 1 in 1 die, right? That's the statistic.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that her kids, have to navigate. And I'm blessed because she's already working on learning about it and how to navigate, and she's communicating with us. A lot of people, I think, kind of shove that under the rug.
Go into it blindly, absolutely. Yeah, they don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I certainly don't.
Right? Yeah.
Especially for me, my wife and I, we've talked about this for long enough that it should be done by now.
Yeah.
But we're we should have a will.
Right.
And,
I don't have one either, and my wife and I talk about it all the time. And I actually was supposed to meet with somebody on Monday to, schedule to put one in. They had to cancel, and so I'm still in that limbo stage of putting a will together because, going back to what we talked about, immortality versus mortality, right? And when you're young, you don't even think about it.
I don't have to worry about it.
At 45 and 50, we're still young.
Right.
Right, but not as young, right?
Yeah.
And so time, now we're starting to think about it more and more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you talked about religion and fitness, two areas that I really love, right?
Yeah.
Am I experts? No, I'm not an expert by any means, but
Right.
I think they're fantastic topics,
Yeah.
right? And one of the things I find interesting, my grandfather, passed away, and I hear these stories all the time. But my grandfather passed away a few years ago, and not religious, right? Not of any faith. I think they grew up, possibly, Catholic.
Yeah.
My dad, when they were kids, that's kind of what they confessed. But nobody went to church, nobody, that sort of thing. But as he got older, my grandma was saying that in his last days, right, maybe a year and under, he kind of got a little bit coherent, but what he talked about was God a lot, right? Which I think is such a fascinating idea, I guess, if you will, because as you get older and closer to death, I think it's inevitable.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That,
What's next?
What's next, right?
Right.
Whether that is something that he just thought of on his own, or spiritually that's put on our heart, as he's maybe can't communicate to my grandma as much, but maybe God is talking to him. Hey, where are you at?
Right.
You've got about where do you want to be, right?
You and I texting each other before this meeting.
Yeah.
Like, hey, just confirming we're still having our meeting.
Yeah, just confirming, Grandpa, you got about 3 months.
God's
so
sending
what,
you text messages.
What is it? What do you want?
Man.
Where are you going to go? Right. So he started talking about things that he's never talked about, before.
Yeah.
It's just an interesting idea because, I believe in this, spiritual realm.
Sure.
And I don't know. The closer you get to it,
Yeah.
the more real it should get, I guess.
And that's really interesting because I do think that there's, we talk about these curves and this, as we progress through life. Like when you're young, and I think, I've got 3 kids at home right now. You've got 3 that are almost out of the house, and we're just at these different phases in life. But like my 14-year-old, for instance, like how much does he think about the end?
Mm-hmm.
How much does he think about any of that stuff? Probably compared to us, not at all.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's got friends, he's got video games, he's got and for him though, and this is interesting as you were talking about it, this picture came up for me. Like I distinctly remember this graduation from high school. Like this like I'm going from this time of certainty to this time of uncertainty.
Absolutely.
The whole world is in front of me. And as you say, your brother is an example of, I had some friends that like, they knew what they were going to do. They were going to go to this college to study this degree, to get this job. And although I don't keep up with many of them, most of them, they followed that trajectory and they landed okay. And I'm not built that way, but I've gone through different phases, but like there's this transition into the unknown.
Yeah.
Right? When you're in high school, you kind of know. You wake up, you go to school, you come home, whatever, you goof off, you play sports, whatever it is that you do, you kind of just have everything laid out. And for the most part, you have a house to come home to with
everything's provided for
food, you just don't have to worry about that stuff.
Yeah.
And then, you transition into this adulthood thing, which we could get a whole topic about adulting and what that actually looks like. Imposter syndrome there all over the place. Like they trusted me to have kids.
Yeah.
But then like this thing that you're talking about is that next thing for us. And I think whereas graduating from high school or any of those other milestones, we're able to see the people that have done it, the ones that have gone before. And you're talking about spiritual, like this phrase from, I want to say mostly like Native American, maybe like Asian, is like being gathered to your ancestors, right? What a beautiful expression for like this unknown step. But like, unlike graduating from high school, we don't get to see where they, where did dad go? Where did grandpa go? What happened next for them? We don't get to see that in the way that we get to see graduation from high school. But what we do get to see is legacy. How does legacy play out? How does we talked about my family crest.
Yeah.
That, my grandpa passed down to my dad and now has been passed down to me and will be passed down to my son someday. And that's such a visceral, but like relatively meaningless passing down, when what we pass down is who we are, the essence of what we've instilled into the next generation.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. That's a very valid. 2 things that you said that really resonate with me. The generation piece of it, and my daughter, my middle daughter, she's at WSU right now, just graduated from high school, and as I watched the process, with her and her friends, it just brought back these memories of how difficult that transition is.
Sure.
Right? Like as you said, you have everything provided for you. Okay, you have your friends. You're into sports. You're into having fun and going to these goofy places and doing goofy things during high school, and it ends.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
People scatter, and you're left with, well, now what?
Right.
Now what? you know?
Yeah.
And so many people, whether you have a direction for college or it's a trade, you're left kind of floundering to figure out what your next step in life is.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
I've been super fascinated at watching my daughter and her friends and her boyfriend transition into that and try to figure it out. And it just it's scary.
It is.
It's scary. And so that kind of translates to, I'm 51. That's still, I still have time, but I'm in that transition stage.
Yeah.
Especially as I go out and as we talked about earlier, as I go out and I go on these different meetings and, CEOs and presidents of companies are getting younger and younger and it's a different atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no suits hardly are worn anymore. It's
right.
Just casual gear and
yeah.
It's all this social media. Oh, you connected here, you connected there. No, I'm not. Do I need to be? Right? I'm not kidding. I was at a meeting yesterday, and this is one of several that I've had with these, 35-year-olds. And they're like, yeah, I've got my media director, I've got my camera guy, right? They follow me, right? And so we're creating content, whether it's for a mortgage broker and I'm like, I am lost here.
Yeah.
I don't have either one of those following me around.
Right.
I mean, so am I not, am I doing something wrong in business these
100%.
days? No, yeah, exactly.
We all are.
Exactly. I don't know. It was just, that's part of the realization that I'm in and kind of the eye opener. And I don't know what it is. If it's an eye opener, am I going to jump out and go get a media producer to help me out? Probably not, right? I might be past that in my life. I don't know where I'm at. I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But another concept that you had that I don't know if I'm wrestling with, or I think a lot about, though. It's just this generational piece, right? Where are we at in life, and how did we get there ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Because things haven't changed over the years, right? Over the thousands of years, business concepts ultimately haven't changed.
Right.
Okay, so they stay. We just kind of keep regurgitating them, right?
Yeah.
Changing them, tweaking them, right?
Yeah.
But the overall concepts of anything hasn't really changed.
Totally.
And I find that through the generations, right? Very, very interesting. And kind of where did that begin? And kind of where it's going, moving forward, and what that looks like for the rest of my life, my kids' life. But what really fascinates me is the history behind that generational piece of it, right? And where it all begins. And I mean, that does go into my spirituality and my journey, and not to bore anybody or you maybe. It's I've done a little research, and it's this fascinating Cain and Abel, right?
Sure.
It kind of starts with Cain and Abel,
Yeah.
right? And as we know, we talk about this generational sin, if you will. Some people call it generational sin, where it just kind of keeps compounding. And anyway, I'll just dive into it a little bit here. So Cain was of a different mindset, right, than Abel, right?
Yeah.
And which is why God blessed his first fruits, Abel's first fruits, right?
Sure.
It was genuine, it was pure, it was of what God had given him, right, already, right? So it was things that were naturally produced, okay? And so it was the more pleasing, right? And then Cain produced things out of the ground that he manipulated, right?
Interesting.
And this was a concept out of a book by Josephus Flavius.
Okay.
Flavius Josephus, his historical writings, right? He was a historical writer back in that day, historian, and he talks about these two individuals. Okay, and so you've got one guy pure of heart, you've got another guy who was a manipulator. Okay, a deceiver of things, right?
Sure.
So he created these weights and measures, these checks and balances, not even really checks and balances, these weights and measures, right? And he created boundaries, right, that we know for real estate, right?
Sure.
It happened way back when.
Interesting.
Right? A phenomenal concept to me, right?
Yeah.
And we just carry these traditions of men, right?
Okay.
From one generation to the next,
Yeah.
right? But it happened so far back,
Yeah.
right? And I often wonder why. Why do we do the things that we do,
Oh man,
right?
that's a big one.
Why is it we're doing that because we've done it all these years, right? We make fun of people who say that, right?
Sure.
Well, it's how it's always been done.
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
Well, why keep doing it that way?
Yeah.
You know, it's. I mean, some of these concepts are things that you'll never be able to change, right?
Sure.
Because they're just like stuck in stone.
Yeah.
But the origins of them I find fascinating. You know? And some I you know, okay, some make sense, some don't make sense.
Yeah.
You know, some are, you know, for, you know, companies to gather profits, to, you know, for gain, right?
Yeah.
But it's all kind of about this manipulation of, you know, knowledge and data, or, you know, possessions. You know, it all has ulterior motives, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm with you 100%. I love going back and looking at historically the big picture, right? And you mentioned generational, and then you mentioned like the Cain and Abel, and like even like Adam and Eve, and just these stories that, and then you know Josephus,
yeah.
like you know the historians, just the. I mean, you think about like the Crusades, you think about the expansion of the Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, the like all of these different, even the one that I've been super fascinated by, and I think we're just increasingly between excavation and radar technology, like some of these ancient civilizations like the Incas and the you know these pyramids that are all over the world, and like and again, I don't go deep enough into any of it to really like be an expert or speak eloquently on any one topic, but I find it fascinating that like, and this is kind of like, I'm having this moment right now, like you and I sitting here with, you know, sport jackets and dress shirts and our hair done, are having the same conversation, theoretically, different vernacular, different verbiage, but we're having the same conversation that has happened for thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, because you know we know when like language, you know, we can kind of like look at certain documented, but like how long has this conversation been going?
Yes,
long time.
A long time, right? Philosophers across the ages, right, have been talking about this.
Yeah. So, and they didn't figure it out, but we're convinced we're going to figure it out.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, yep. In 15 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And then go have our meetings and do our
yeah, for sure.
Man. And I think that's something, you know, to take this back to the beginning of like hitting this certain milestones. I think that you cross over thresholds when you receive a certain new level of humility. Mm-hmm. I think that up until a point, we walk in with a bravado or an immortality, like it's an unawareness, and it's not necessarily bad. Mm-hmm. And I remember distinctly, probably 20 years ago, wrestling with maturity. Like I just want to skip the amount of time that it normally takes, and I just want to be mature. And I don't know that you get to be. Yeah. You go through these things that humble you. I would almost say humiliate you, although that context can be misconstrued. But like and from that humility comes a new era for you to walk into.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and then, you know, talk about the Bible, like there's a lot in there about being humble. Humble yourself. Yeah. Humble yourself. It's like we just need to accept that there's so much more out there than we could possibly grapple with.
Oh, fathom, right. Imagine.
Fathom.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or wrap our head around, which again goes back to our very beginning of the conversation. Makes me think I know less, right? Like the more I go down these rabbit holes, the less I know about life.
Yeah.
You know?
No doubt. Well, I think that's a perfect segue, and I know we don't have a lot of time because you have a meeting that you have to get to. But come next Friday, or whatever you're watching this, Friday the 27th, 26th? No, we're not that far up. 30th. Friday, May 30th, we're going to do exactly this. We're going to have a group of people, and it's kind of that group think humility. Like, hey, I don't have this figured out. You don't have this figured out. Nobody else at the table has it figured out, but we all have picked up pieces along the way. Let's put our ideas and thoughts together and come out with a little bit more humility, a little bit better understanding of what we're up against. And so, yeah, looking forward to seeing you on Friday.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
you
you,
coming
John.
out.